Omar, you went to a award show that I've never heard of, but is apparently a very big deal. The Pride of Britain Awards.
The 25th anniversary this year. It was on Monday evening, and ITV pretty much the whole time has televised it, and that'll be airing on Thursday evening.
Sorry, what are the awards actually for?
For community heroes, essentially.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So incredible stories. I was probably the only person there who didn't get selfies. I'm so bad around celebrities. If there's someone who I really know their work and just have a lot of respect for, I'll go up to them and say, I think you're amazing at blah blah blah. I've done that in the past, but just to get a celebrity, like there was Richard Madeley, for example. People were queuing up to have pictures with Richard Madeley. Now, no disrespect to the guy, but he's just someone I know off the top.
What news stories mattered most this week in the world of media and advertising? I'm Jack Benjamin, a reporter for The Media Leader.
And I'm Omar Oakes, editor-in-chief.
And this week we'll be discussing Netflix's latest earnings, losses at Sky, the latest IPA Bellwether report, and much more. But first, Omar, with WPP reporting its third quarter results today, and I should say we're recording this episode on Wednesday, we've now received results from all the major media agency holding groups apart from Dentsu, which doesn't report earnings until the 13th of November. The top line is that WPP returned to growth in Q3 with a modest 0.5% year-on-year increase in organic revenue, led in part by a 4.8% organic growth delivered by Groupe M. What else stood out to you from the report?
It's pretty much flat, isn't it? Yeah. So North America up a bit, flat. Western Europe, 2.2%. UK, definitely flat. China, we've talked about this before, down 20% in China.
Wow.
Obviously, we know that there have been arrests in China last year over, let's just use a catch-all term, say irregularities with how the market operates over there. And by no means should anyone conclude that WPP is the only active agency group in China that would be exposed to such things. But definitely fair to say they've been exposed to that market more than their rivals. So yeah, down 20%. But otherwise, flat.
I mean, other holdco earnings have come out. You mentioned the China bit. Just for some of them, they've done extremely well in China/Asia Pacific more generally.
Because they picked up WPP accounts.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, that is likely what happened. Just to put a figure on it, organic growth for Omnicom in the Asia Pacific region was 10.9%, and in Publicis, with Publicis, China's growth was 12.4%.
Wow,
So,
how did they do that? How did they do that? That's like have you seen A Beautiful Mind? Have you seen that movie?
I actually have not seen it.
Okay, so Russell Crowe plays John Nash, and he's trying to explain. They're in a bar. He's trying to explain this very kind of complicated mathematical concept in a way that the audience can understand.
Right.
Picking up girls in a bar, and he's like, well, if everyone goes after the most attractive girl in the bar, then only one person's going to succeed and everyone's going to fail. So actually, it's the optimal Nash equilibrium strategy to go after the second or I guess third most attractive girl, because then you're going to be the first choice. So
sounds like a real nice guy.
I guess that explains Publicis Group's success in Asia.
It also explains dating apps in a nutshell, I suppose. Other top lines, just more generally on some of the other holding companies. Omnicom reported 6.5% organic revenue growth. Publicis 5.8% organic revenue growth. It also increased its guidance for the full year from 5% to 5.5%. IPG was completely flat in its growth. So a bit of a point of difference there. On average, the four holding companies grew 3.5% organically. However, industry analyst Brian Weiser noted in his Madison and Wall newsletter that, quote, because Omnicom does not report net revenue or net revenue organic growth, and because they book so much principal-based activity as gross revenue, we can be almost certain that the correct organic growth rate is lower. Principal-based media was something that was mentioned in a number of the earning calls for these companies. Arthur Sadoun was asked about it by analysts. What's the concern with principal-based media? And I mean, we've written about it a little bit on the website before, but it sounds like analysts are really picking up on it now.
Yes. So I think Brian is right to make the distinction between Omnicom and the rest. So it's actually quite difficult to compare organic growth figures for the major holding companies because they account for the monies differently.
Right.
So when Brian says that so you said Omnicom reported 6.5% organic revenue growth. Now, principal-based media is important because that's where essentially you're buying media wholesale and selling it back to your clients with a markup, right?
Right.
And we'll get into why that may be problematic, right? Now, if Omnicom books all of that in their accounting as revenue, then obviously their organic revenue is going to be higher, even though that's just moving money around because they're just buying media wholesale and selling it back to clients, right? They're only making, the markup is what they make, but it's not actually adding to the top line of the business in a meaningful sense. Whereas you could, the IPG, for example, which does far less of this, and we'll come on to IPG specifically, they wouldn't be able to do that. So again, it's one of these reasons why it's difficult to measure organic growth for these companies to get a real sense of how Omnicom is doing versus the other big four holding groups.
Right.
As you say, Arthur, this has come up quite a lot in the earnings round where analysts have switched on. Number one, analysts are more aware of this happening. We've written about this in the Media Leader for quite a while. But also it seems that these CEOs, the Rubicon has been crossed in terms of how willing they are to talk about it. There's no hiding that they do it anymore. And if anything, as Arthur Sadoun said, as Philip Krukowski from IPG said yesterday, clients are actually asking for it, they say.
Well, there's a bit of a, I don't want to say it's a row necessarily, but Mark Reed had made comments earlier in the year about proprietary media. And then Sadoun seemed to respond in the latest earnings call. What's this all about? Why are they throwing stones at each other?
It may benefit from some trade media publications to make it look like there's a spat going on. But like I wrote about this in my column not too long ago, where I was looking ahead to this earnings season, and I was looking at the state of these companies and comparing. They're essentially an oligopoly, a global media oligopoly. Very few companies, concentrated market share. So it was like, let's compare that to a very familiar UK oligopoly, supermarkets. And this is relevant because of the discussion around principal media, where a supermarket buys food wholesale and then stocks their shelves of it and sells it to customers with a markup. Right, that's their business, and I think agencies where if they completely drop the pretense that they are agnostic consultants on behalf of advertisers who can advise them from a completely neutral, dispassionate standpoint of this is how you should plan and buy your media. This retailing of principle-based media seems to be a complete throwing on the bonfire of that idea, because I don't care how big you are as an advertiser or how closely you audit this stuff. If a media agency is buying this stuff wholesale and then selling it back to you, clearly there is going to be an incentive for them to sell one media over another based on the markup that they're getting. They're selling the media to you. They're brokering the media to you, and that means that the onus is on you, the advertiser, to audit this stuff properly, to make sure that they're doing what they say that they're doing, to make sure that your contracts are watertight. And I'm not sure how many advertisers out there are actually equipped to do this, let alone switched on to be able to do it.
Are there certain media channels where this is more common, like saying buying TV more than, I don't know, publishing or something like that?
Yeah, so increasingly with connected TV, there is inventory that has been available to buy at scale for a while, and some holding groups more than others have particularly focused on selling connected TV inventory. Now, is suddenly when your media agency is saying, this TV campaign that you've just bought in these markets, do you know what you should do? You should put a load of it on ITVX in the UK or other VOD or Netflix, now that they've got advertising, you should really go in there. And they say, and the advertiser's like, oh, okay, well, why is that? Well, is the media agency recommending it because they've just done a massive deal with the supply side or direct one of these companies? Or is it because they really think that, oh yeah, because that's where your target audience is, and that's going to be a really good media planning decision? Again, I'm not suggesting that anything underhand is happening, but as an advertiser, the question is, how do you know?
Right. It's the appearance potentially of a conflict of interest, regardless of whether or not that's actually occurring. That makes sense. Yeah. And so the interesting thing about this earnings round, as I mentioned, is that the Sadoun, it came up during the Publicis call, Philip Krukowski yesterday at IPG, talking a lot about principle-based media. IPG, they've just lost the Amazon account, which, we're probably talking about between $200 million, $300 million a year in revenue for them. That's a huge account that's gone out the door. And, I think it was about 18 months ago, he first started talking about principle-based media is something we're going to be getting more involved in. Definitely late to the party compared to Omnicom, Publicis and WPP. And now they're going full steam ahead. And that he was at pains to say that this is something that clients are asking for. But again, I come back to, there was a ANA, the ANA did a big report on this in April. 18, it's nearly 1 in 5, 18% of marketers surveyed said they didn't know whether they were using principle-based media or not. They didn't know. Right.
So when a big agency group boss turns around and says, well, lots of clients are asking us for this. Well, if it's a climate where lots of people don't even know whether they're using it or not, I think I would like to know what a lot more marketers think about this, because it could be a good deal for them, right? Yeah. But how do you know?
Well, if you're listening to this podcast and have any thoughts, please do let us know, because we'd like to cover this further.
Well, yeah. And just from a common sense point of view, as I mentioned at the top, this is an essential oligopoly, right? These are 4 big companies, international conglomerates that buy media, billions of dollars of media every year for some of the biggest brands in the world. Why do they need to broker in this way? Surely they already have buying at scale.
I mean, it's a good question. One we will probably look to pose to more agencies going forward. Any other last takeaways from the different earnings reports?
No, I mean, it's to slightly kind of answer the rhetorical question just now. The big thing, we haven't got Alphabet or Meta results yet.
No,
right?
they'll come next week.
But it's obvious to anyone who pays attention to this industry that the big trend is digital ad sellers keep on getting bigger. A lot of that growth is coming from SMEs who are buying direct. So the question is, when we talk about kind of these trends that are happening, how much growth the agency groups there is, why are they doing principle-based media? It's all within the context of these big companies, despite still being really big, they are shrinking on a relative basis when you think about the whole picture of global marketing, what's actually happening. Because Facebook and Google, they're not just getting their money from, more money coming through WPP, Publicis, etc. As I said, they're getting it from direct.
Yeah.
And AI is going to play its role in kind of optimizing for that, those direct buys, just obviating the need for agencies at all. And you could argue that's why we're looking at these short-term tactics like more principle-based media, right? Because actually, fundamentally, what's the long-term strategic direction of this industry? It's probably more direct buying and less agency involvement. So that, I mean, it's a piece of a long-term trend, and I think you have to see that through the lens of this is the way things are going. Is it necessarily for the better? I don't know, but again, it puts a hell of a lot of pressure on marketers of big brands who are just trying to make sense of it.
Right. It's not just Google and Meta either as well. I mean, you start to see other media channels, broadcasters going after longer tail advertisers, or audio companies going after the longer tail of advertisers, these sort of SMEs, making it as easy as possible for them to buy on their own platform. So, obviously all the social media companies and tech companies have done a really good job of providing tools, whether it's using AI or otherwise, but you start to see broadcasters now starting to use AI to go after new to TV advertisers. And there is a broader trend of chasing all of that extra money, as you noted, that isn't just like from a huge brand with lots of resources that's using a media agency with lots of resources. Moving on, apart from holdcos, there were a number of additional stories we wanted to cover today. We'll tick them off one by one. First, it's Rajar Day, the quarterly release of UK radio listening figures. While we don't have the full figures as of the recording of this episode, we do have some quick top lines. So all radio listening did continue to increase slightly, with reach up by 85,000. Results have swung slightly back in the BBC's favor after many quarters in which commercial radio increased reach relative to the BBC. BBC increased reach and total listening hours slightly this quarter, while all commercial dropped reach and total hours slightly. And Global had a slightly better quarter three than Bauer. They had a slight increase in reach compared to Bauer had a slight decrease. And there's loads of spin-off stations that some of these commercial radio brands have released just in the past quarter, and I'll be chatting with Global's Chief Commercial Officer Mike Gordon about its own new stations, launched 12 last quarter, as well as the commercial strategy behind them in a written interview on the Media Leader in the coming days, so keep an eye out for that. And of course, full coverage of Rajar will be up on our website by the time this episode airs, so do please check it out for more info. Moving on, in TV news, Sky revealed its 2023 full-year financial results, which showed the broadcaster doubled its losses year on year. Omar, I'm curious, what's behind this sort of loss making, and what else have the results said?
I mean, churn has always been an issue for Sky in particular because it's a pay TV broadcaster, as well as being mobile, internet, telco company. Looking at the whole business, total revenues were broadly flat, but ad revenue was down 5%. That's obviously much less than declines we've seen at ITV and Channel 4, which those were more like in the region of 15%.
Yeah, 15, 16, yeah.
But, Sky is a pay TV business, so a very different ad proposition. While it's also a sales house for Paramount and others, obviously. And direct-to-consumer grew a little bit, nearly 2%. Content revenue down 8% as well, and we've seen that may come onto Netflix later. Netflix very kind of like bullish on still commissioning things, but not kind of splurging as it used to be in the past. There's just generally depressed demand for all of this content. We're still kind of like seeing the after effects of the pandemic when everyone was at home and kind of like streaming all the time, and that's regressed to the mean now. So yeah, it's the losses doubled. Primarily, yes, been some decrease in ad revenue, but also the operating expenses went up quite a lot. And there's a lot of inflation which is still kind of affecting that model.
Yeah, I mean, it's happening in a broader context of sports rights, for instance, are getting a little bit more expensive. That will increase costs, in the future. Probably, I don't want to say indefinitely, but certainly it's trending in a way where sports rights are just continuing to get more and more expensive. Sky paid more for a renewal of its Premier League deal. This was December of last year than it had during the prior deal by over $1 billion more, right? For the same thing fundamentally. And there's also this broader issue that Sky will be facing in terms of whether or not it's going to be able to renew a deal with Warner Brothers Discovery over showing HBO shows. Right now it does that exclusively. Warner Brothers is launching Max in the UK in 2026. Will probably coincide with the release of its Harry Potter TV series, which I guess people are excited about, even though those movies don't feel like they were that long ago, but they actually were, which is kind of crazy because they ended over 10 years ago now. I don't know.
That's still fresh.
Yeah,
fresh magic.
It feels fresh, but not for anyone probably considerably younger than me. So the concern I would imagine is if you no longer have exclusivity over that, will you have to invest more in original programming? I think to your point earlier in terms of, the expenses are already going up and the revenues are broadly flat, are they going to have to spend more to create more shows to then make sure that they don't lose out subscribers to churn? I mean, this is a broader issue that the company's going to be facing over the next couple of years.
Yeah, and it comes down to whether you are a platform or you are a broadcaster. And I say that the distinction being, do we have a vibe as a broadcaster? Do we have a content slate which speaks to some kind of broader strategy in terms of what we're trying to do as a broadcaster, or are we just kind of like putting out loads of reruns? And I think Sky over the last 30 years, definitely that first 10 to 15 years, it probably just did rely heavily on importing a lot of US content. So they had exclusivity over Friends for a while in the UK. They had The Simpsons for a long time. And nowadays, as you say, they rely heavily on Sky Atlantic, as was HBO content and live sport. Now, as we know, live sport is going to increasingly get more and more expensive. You saw what happened in India with Disney, where they lost rights to the cricket,
yes,
and to Hotstar. Was it Hotstar? I've forgotten the brand name.
Yes, Hotstar, yeah.
And what do? They just bought the company. So problem solved, right? And you see with MLS, Apple, Amazon now doing Champions League in the UK, gobbling up little sports rights deals all over the place. It's going to get increasingly more expensive. This is a company which is being increasingly backed into a corner in terms of where do you go now? And it has to decide over where are you a platform? Because the thing about having the Premier League football for a long time, there is a vibe around how Sky broadcasts that, right? Lots of properties like Monday Night Football, the different things that they do around the week, even like the online clips, there is a vibe to how Sky is a broadcaster in that respect. And, for example, one of the few TV shows I'm watching right now is a great little sitcom called Breeders, starring Martin Freeman.
I have heard really good things about that.
Directed, written by Chris Addison from Veep, The Thick of It. It's a wonderful little show, but it's a Sky original.
Right.
But yeah, I'm watching it on Netflix because they've taken that decision that after a while we're going to license stuff to other streaming companies. That can work for you. Channel 4 has done that in the past, but the difference is there is definitely a vibe and a style to a Channel 4 production because of its model. Whereas I would say if Sky is going to go down that route, it has to offer something distinctive, I think. And this is going to be a question for all broadcasters going forward, because if you reduce all content to just fundable, tradable things that keeps popping on and off different streaming services the whole time, then there's no real incentive as a customer to stay on there other than price. And that's a dangerous game, as we know. Yeah,
original programming is key to, seems like, most streamers' success, but it's a mix of original programming as well as a large content library. So you have great original programming that gets lots of laudits on Apple TV Plus, for instance, whether it's Ted Lasso or Severance. But once people watch those shows, they then unsubscribe from Apple TV Plus. And because the content library is smaller than a place like Netflix. And I do want to get onto Netflix because they did also have their earnings as well.
Yeah, but it's like, I mean, HBO is a perfect example of this. This is why it's so important for Sky, because with HBO content that there is a vibe to it. Maybe less now than there was, but you knew that if you'd never watched The Sopranos, for example, okay, that's a bad example because you probably watched The Sopranos. But if you never watched
Ballers or something,
yeah, because you know the vibe of HBO that you're going to give it a chance.
It's probably good.
Yeah, because not only do you know that there's high quality to HBO content, you know that there is a vibe, there's a kind of honesty and a kind of creative freedom that you just don't get with other broadcasters, content companies.
Yeah.
So you're more willing, to your point about Apple TV, for example, with everything that Jay Hunt, who seems to be doing a very good job over there, you're more likely to stay on that platform and try content that you're not necessarily familiar with, as opposed to going for what Netflix has benefited from, as well as doing its original stuff, a load of reruns. So you can't. It's very difficult to compete long term with Netflix and Disney in particular on the content libraries, on the volume game. But if you're going to be, let's say, Netflix is your kind of your staple streaming service. Disney you might have for kids, or you're a big Marvel, Star Wars fan. But then there's kind of room, I think, for a lot of people to have another one
that's like the premium.
That's
like really, home box office. I mean, that's the whole idea behind the brand, right? Of HBO.
Exactly. So, and I think that distinctiveness is going to be really important, because I don't think it's something that every consumer is going to want to have. So these different streaming providers are going to need to pick and choose their niche, if you like. Where do they fit in?
Let's talk about Netflix. They released their third quarter results last week. I covered this news for us. Some key top lines about the state of the business. Total revenue grew 15% year on year to $9.8 billion. Netflix's ad tier membership grew 35% quarter on quarter. A net total of 5.1 million new streaming subscribers were added. That's a deceleration compared to last year's Q3, when it added 8.8 million subscribers. And also worth noting, next quarter is the last time that they're going to be reporting subscriber figures at all. So that's being done because executives at Netflix don't really feel it's a good reflection of the health of the business, especially now that they have advertising. Advertising is not making up a majority of revenue, but they do expect it to double next year from a low base in terms of the amount of ad revenue they're coming in. And
they also don't want to report it because the numbers are going down.
Right. Well, that's yes. Behind that, I mean, definitely true between the lines. You can read between the lines of the reporting, and that's a totally fair analysis. One thing definitely worth noting, Netflix's new in-house ad tech platform is on track to launch in Canada next quarter, before releasing more broadly in 2025. So lots going on at Netflix. It seems like overall the company is growing quite strongly, but it is in this weird transitional period where ads are now a really important part of the business, and they need to build out those different ad tools to make it an increasingly attractive proposition for brands and advertisers.
Yeah, and I think they've had ads for 2 years, and they're now on their third chief sales officer. And Xander, Microsoft, was supposed to be doing the back end tech stack, and now you say that they're developing their own thing.
They opened up as well
without Microsoft, and they're going to launch it in Canada for some reason.
Well, they'll test it in Canada, is what it sounds like. They also have you can buy on, I think it's the Trade Desk and Google DV360 as opposed to just Microsoft. That happened earlier this year. So that obviously that didn't work out very well with Microsoft.
Evidently, and interestingly, we've spoken previously about gaming being this kind of quieter but kind of interesting feather to Netflix's bow. But something you spotted, they've quietly closed one of the gaming studios it acquired in 2022. Do you get the sense that, or have they said anything? Are they kind of going off gaming? What's the deal here?
No, I mean, on the earnings call, gaming was mentioned as a continued important point for growing the business. So it's not that their gaming strategy, I think, has necessarily changed in a general sense. The studio that they closed was developing a multi-platform AAA game. It hasn't been announced yet, so it's a shame. I feel bad for all those people that were working on that game. This does happen fairly often in the gaming industry, where someone might be working on a game for years and then just gets completely binned. I wouldn't be surprised if Netflix is deciding to maybe. This is not based in any reporting or any announcement that they've made, but I wouldn't be surprised if they're pivoting from let's be a AAA game developer to being more of a developer to use our own IP for maybe more mobile gaming. A AAA game, for anyone who doesn't play games, is we're talking like the highest of quality. And it usually requires a lot of cost, a lot of time to develop it if it's going to be good. The monetization of that game is not always clearly profitable for certain companies. The game would have to sell a lot of units for probably a pretty high cost in order to make a profit off that. So whereas, more mobile gaming or gaming that, could tie in better with Netflix's broader business model of being a subscription-based business would probably make more sense, I guess.
Yeah, I don't understand what the rationale would be for developing AAA games, as you put it. That this is, Netflix is a broadcaster, it's a streaming company, it's an owner of IP. Mm-hmm. As you say, you can see the synergy between kind of mobile games, simple premise, but you're leveraging, they do have examples already with Narcos. There's definitely a Narcos game.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to imagine. I'm trying to think of a really wacky example, like Orange is the New Black, but they have to you have to escape from prison or something like that. Yeah. And the premise, the gameplay doesn't need to be that sophisticated, but it's because you love the show and you just there might be hidden Easter eggs that you could work with the writers of the show to develop things. And it's sort of like an extended universe.
There's lots of great examples of using TV IP for relatively simple games. The Walking Dead was a huge show. I never actually watched it, that AMC did, but it created a video game that was really just it was almost like a graphic novel that you could play. So the gameplay itself was mostly just making decisions and conversations with people. And so I'll say that doesn't require a lot of development. I mean, obviously you have to write an original story and all this stuff, but it probably doesn't. It wasn't like some big AAA release. It was a relatively simple game that did extremely well based off of really strong IP. And I would expect that model makes more sense for someone like Netflix than coming up with maybe like some big original AAA game. They could also be licensing their IP to other game developers. I'm sure that will be in the cards if they're really looking to approach a gaming strategy. You've seen lots of other companies do this, especially around like superhero games or like there were some great Batman games made last decade by a studio called Rocksteady, and Warner Brothers Discovery just licensed the material and got a nice little fee for that. So gaming will continue to be important for Netflix, but I think they're still probably working out exactly how they want to approach that media channel.
It's just another example of over the years I've been quite down on Netflix getting involved in selling TV ads. My thing about it has always been Netflix, ever since it pivoted from selling DVDs online to streaming, there's just been a very clear strategy about how to do that. And the big win for them, it feels like in recent years, is I think a majority now of their content comes from outside of the US. And that's always felt like the big winning strategy, where you create a global offer, but you're able to target and adapt Netflix in different markets. But that user experience is broadly the same. It just works really well. Again, coming back to the thing as a broadcaster, what's your vibe? What's your content offer? And the bolting on the ads, they have such a huge content library of creating original content, which is designed to be watched without ads. And now you're having to shoehorn ads into it. I just don't think I don't think it's good for the long run strategy of the business. And the gaming part, I think, as we just discussed, the gaming element can be accretive to that strategy. Again, think of is it Money Heist, the big Spanish hit that they had, or Squid Game, which is coming back for another series, Korean show. Kind of leveraging IP into gaming be really interesting, and it's a way of solidifying that that position as your market leader and developing that brand further about what is Netflix content and how does it live in different places, as opposed to bolting on ads, which are going to be the same as Disney, potentially the same as Disney Plus or Amazon Prime Video ads, or dare I say YouTube as well. It just feels like, again, public company itis, saying and doing things that, the market wants you to hear, rather than actually holding firm of your strategic ideals.
Well, we know that ads came from one bad quarter, right, of lack of subscriber growth, and then a quarter later they were announcing an ad tier after years of saying they wouldn't do it. Right? Well, so there's business pressures for why ads have been adopted, and it seems like it's at least been rewarded in terms of investor confidence in the company. But I think your point is strong in terms of, from a content side, there are more interesting things that can be done, and gaming fits into that strategy. Generally speaking, but high costs, a lot of investment required, and depending on the model of the game that you design, the returns might not be that great. I think really what Netflix would probably love, and everyone would love that works in gaming, would be like the next Fortnite or Roblox, almost like a platform that becomes monetizable in perpetuity, as opposed to like a game that you buy once and then play and then kind of moves on. The IPA Bellwether was last week. Key takeaways, top lines. We've talked a little bit about how the holding companies are performing. But what's a big trend UK specific that we're seeing in the latest Bellwether?
It seemed that there's a lot of caution right now. People looking ahead to what Rachel Reeves, the new-ish UK Chancellor, Labour Chancellor, is going to do with her first autumn statement budget. It's widely known that there are going to be further spending reductions. Marketers worried about consumer confidence. It just seems ever since Brexit, it's been really fragile, the UK. And I think there's a reason why, Liz Truss, it was why she was such a disaster as Prime Minister, because not only was she wildly irresponsible in terms of just like slash and burn policies and freaking out the markets, but also it's not felt like a strong economy to begin with. So we've always been vulnerable. So I think it's interesting that I just get the sense in Bellwether, kind of some quarters it's gone up, but well, it feels quite fragile, and everyone's kind of like waiting and seeing, and it feels like we've been waiting and seeing forever.
It's interesting. I mean, total marketing budgets. This is the first time that they stalled in 14 quarters. So I take your point about fragility, but marketing budgets actually on net had been increasing despite that, but then you get something like a shock of like, what's the new budget going to be like? Why it's been delayed? It's coming out in October, even though the Labour government was, voted in the summer. So there's a level of nervousness around it for sure, and I think that's clearly showing up here. It's interesting you made the point about Brexit, because you could probably make the argument actually that goes much further back, that goes back to basically the financial recession in 2008, 2009. And then you had austerity. And then since then, it's sort of been a policy of cutting as opposed to investing.
Yeah. And it's a good point, actually, because since that time, 2009, you had essentially zero interest rates in the UK for a decade. I mean, that is abnormal. Very strange that we should have interest rates so low. And they finally come back up because global supply side issues, big inflation, but it's still, you feel like there are some fundamental issues in the UK that marketing confidence just doesn't ever seem as buoyant as maybe it should. It's interesting, video investment growing. I mean, we were talking before about connected TV and all the inventory opportunities, but it's serious. I think it's there is a good reason to be bullish about video in particular. Did you find that?
I did. So it's interesting. Main media budgets actually grew, even though total marketing budgets stalled, but they only grew because of video. All the other channels, verticals that the IPA measured, had a net decrease of marketing spend going toward them. And video's particularly exciting, I think, to a lot of marketers, and for all the reasons that we've talked about many times on this podcast and at our events. So the reason I think that some marketers told me is that there's, more and more touch points available, that TVs, the funnels collapsed a little bit, especially on CTV. You still have the strong sort of brand messaging that you can get across on TV, but then you can also have better targeting. And now streamers have shoppable ads, and there's loads more you can do with data now that marketers are unlocking. So I think it makes sense for a lot of marketers, if they're going to be putting money toward anything, TV does make some sense, or at least video more broadly makes some sense. You see a lot of popularity, of course, with like social video, YouTube. These are all places where you get loads of eyeballs. You can have a lot of control over what you're doing. I mean, none of what I'm saying is particularly new or anything.
And now ITV will create an AI version for you if you don't want to hire an ad agency, as
for long tail advertisers.
Previous podcast episode,
exactly. And you also have like new entrants just in the past year. Amazon Prime Video launching ads. Netflix is only a few years old, but Amazon launched in January. And Adam Folie, Bountiful Cow, and I talked to him. He called Amazon Prime Video a particular game changer. There's lots of crossover opportunity, especially with the rest of what's going on at Amazon ads that you can utilize. So makes sense. Makes sense to me that video would be doing well. Final bit of news that I wanted to discuss with you. It's cinema news. Joker Folie Deux. It's heading already to video on demand. After underperforming at the US box office over the past 3 weeks. It's coming to streaming services in the US on the 29th of October. Global box office is looking like it's maybe going to limp past 200 million against a production budget of around 200 million. But of course, that doesn't also include the marketing budget. So on the whole, it's going to be probably a big loss for Warner Brothers. Not happy news. I'm curious, have you seen this film? Or are you at all surprised by this, poor box office performance, poor attendance performance?
I didn't know much about this movie before. I saw the trailer on YouTube some months ago, and I was like, "Oh yeah, Joker with Joaquin Phoenix. Yeah, I've seen that. That was quite good. Yeah." And there's like DC, there were Warner Brothers Discovery, and I'm glad that we praised them with HBO before, because this is batshit what appears to have been going on. So I saw the trailer, and it kind of didn't give much away, but like Lady Gaga's in it and things, and I then kind of started to see the early reviews of the movie. He was like, "Oh yeah, this movie's very strange. It's essentially it's nothing like the first movie. It's in a courtroom. It's like he's been banged up for murdering someone in the first movie.
Yeah, Robert De Niro.
Yeah. And Lady Gaga's in it. Oh, and by the way, it's a musical. You what? It's a musical. And can I give away the spoiler? I'm not going to give away a spoiler, but
Have you seen it?
No, but I resolved that I was never going to watch this movie because it sounded so awful. And critics have almost universally that I've seen have said it's awful. Like it's you might think a musical could be really good. Some of my favorite movies are musicals, right? But this is badly done. And Lady Gaga, by the way, is hardly in this movie. So it's really badly done. But the interesting thing is that the director, it seems that he's essentially been able to go off and just create this project without a lot of oversight.
Todd Phillips.
Yeah. Which it's an amazing thing. And I gather that they didn't even do focus groups properly for this movie. And so you look back on it, and it shouldn't be a surprise that obviously it's a comic book IP movie, and if it's going to enrage the comic book community, then you're off to a bad start. And if it's not even going to be critically acclaimed, you can take some risks with creative IP like this, but it's just a fascinating thing that I think will be a case study for filmmaking for years to come, and how not to do it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Because I appreciate big creative swings, and this seemed like a big creative swing, but I didn't even like the first Joker. And I thought, I was surprised that the first Joker did as well as it did, both critically and commercially. But I talk to Tom Linney at DCM every month when looking at box office statistics, looking at trying to get an understanding of cinema attendance, because obviously that's important for any cinema advertisers to be aware of. And it seemed like there was a lot of hype going into this. There was an expectation that this would do extremely well and could help buoy going into what seems like a pretty strong, hopefully, early winter, late fall, late autumn, period for cinema. And that this would be like the first big film of the autumn, and it's just not happened. And so I think the broader concern is, would this put people off from going to see some other films this year that I don't know if they're going to be particularly well received? I mean, Gladiator 2, for instance, expectation is that needs to do really well, not just for the production company, but also for cinemas. I don't know if that looks particularly good. I saw the trailer for that, and it looks to me actually quite bad, but
really?
I haven't seen reviews in yet. Wicked obviously is going to do very well. There's Paddington in Peru. There's loads of big movies that are going to come out at the end of the year. I'm really looking forward to like Nosferatu, which probably won't be big at the box office, but will be a big creative swing. But having sort of Joker perform so poorly is a real shame, because as we've been tracking for a couple of years now, cinemas still haven't fully recovered from pre-pandemic. Probably won't ever, because of all of the reasons we've talked about earlier today in terms of what streaming services are doing, and the fact that the Joker's going to streaming services within less than a month is not great.
Yeah. I love the cinema. I'm going to make a point of it when I might have some more time on my hands next year to go to the cinema at least once a month.
Yeah, I also love going to the cinema. Completely different experience, especially for big movies that deserve to be seen on a big screen. I saw Anora recently, which was the Cannes winner, and it was absolutely fantastic.
What is that? I don't know that.
It's a film by Sean Baker. It's about a sort of a Cinderella story type thing with about a stripper in New York, I think in Brooklyn specifically.
Stripper Cinderella.
Well, she ends up getting
sold.
One of her clients is like the son of a Russian oligarch, and he decides he wants to marry her so he can stay in the U.S. As opposed to having to go back home to Russia. And
like a Melania thing. Can I say that?
I don't know if you get. I don't know. It doesn't get to the point where she's having a kid with the guy, but hilarity ensues. It's a really strong mix between absolutely amazing physical comedy and dialogue that is really fantastic, and actually some pretty tragic, stuff, commentary on social inequality and social class. And I thought it was a fantastic movie and worth seeing in cinemas. I think is really the key point. Even films that aren't necessarily big blockbusters where things are exploding all the time, it's a completely different experience to see it in a cinema. So I'd recommend, especially for those types of more art house movies, to go and support them and go see them in cinemas. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you next week.